Welcome, everybody. This is Dr. Nick Burwick. I wanted to introduce today's podcast brought to you by AVAHO Voices. This is our AVAHO Carecast. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Executive Director of AVAHO, Julie Lawson, and our guest today is Dr. Blair DeStefano. She is the Division Director of Hematology Oncology at Uniformed Services University. And with that, Dr. DeStefano, we'll kick it over to you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your current role and responsibilities.
Yes, Nick, thank you for inviting me to join you today on this podcast, and it's nice to see you and hear from you. I go by my middle name, Blair DeStefano, and I am currently the HemOnc Division Director for the Department of Medicine at the medical school at the Uniformed Services University here in Bethesda, Maryland. I'm also an attending oncologist at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, which is on the same campus as the medical school. And for the past 3.5 years, I've been the Hematology Oncology Fellowship Program Director. But in the next couple of months, I will be passing the wand to a colleague.
I'm wondering, in terms of your current interests and what you do on a day-to-day basis, within the world of hematology, oncology, in terms of clinical interest.
Absolutely. In the military, we wear multiple different hats. We're expected to take leadership roles and have collateral responsibilities. But to me, my number one job is always taking care of my patients. And so that's my primary focus is my patients. So in addition to standard patient care, I'm also co-leading the research team at Walter Reed. And a part of that means making sure that the latest and the greatest clinical trials are open and accruing at Walter Reed. And it doesn't just stop there. I also feel there's a responsibility, kind of like what we're doing here today, networking with the Veterans Health Administration. And so one thing we're trying to do is better crosstalk with the DC VA, with the Martinsburg, West Virginia VA, and open up our clinical trials to the veteran population as well. So in addition to patient care, clinical trials, I also have a few of my own small research projects, and they all focus on hematologic malignancies in our military patients.
Hi, Dr. DeStefano. I am Julie Lawson. I'm the Executive Director for AVAHO. I am also usually alongside Dr. Burwick for the podcast. I have a question actually about the smaller projects. How do you manage, and not so much in the technical side of what you're doing, but the logistical side, how do you manage overseeing several projects at one time?
Yeah, it can be challenging. I tell you, in oncology, our patients are so sick, and we're used to managing multiple sick patients at once. High stakes decisions are made in our job every day. And so to do a few small retrospective studies, these are low risk. These are less than minimal risk, especially if you're doing it properly, if you're following the regulations of the IRB to ensure that patients are protected and that patient information is protected and is used scientifically. So to me, it hasn't really been a problem. If you compare it to clinical care, it's not difficult. It's really fun. It's actually really fulfilling, and I can bring it back to my patients, because when my patients come to me and say, and Nick knows, our patients come to us knowing that their cancer is somehow related to something about their military service. And so to be able to tell them, yes, we're doing this small little retrospective study, or yes, we're looking into this, I think that means a lot to our patients, and it gives our patients trust and confidence in us.
Dr. DeStefano, I still remember we had you speak at AVAHO a few years ago in Chicago, and just exactly that topic. I know that's an interest of yours in terms of toxic exposure among military members and at risk of blood disorders and hematologic malignancies. I was wondering a little bit about what spurred your interest in that, and if you could tell us a little bit more about how you approach a military member with a toxic exposure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it all comes down to our patients. we have such a special, unique patient population. And, let's be honest, Nick, if we look at research going on in America, as we know, most people who participate in research, these are more affluent people, and there are major disparities in research. So it's always been important to me that our special population, our population, I don't think represents the most affluent group of people in our country. I don't. A lot of our veteran patients especially have issues with homelessness and different things. And it's always been really important to me that we take good care of our patients who have served. And in doing so, we must address exposures. I mean, that is front and center in our patients' minds. If we don't think about that and study that, we're failing our patients. It's an important, unique concern to our special patient population. And so in order to do our due diligence for our patients, I think we must, and move the needle forward for our patients, I think we owe it to them to at least think about this, have conversations about this, and if we can, network with other people to study this. And so my interest is hematologic malignancies. I actually started out my career interested in AML and MDS, which are very genomically rich. We have sliced and diced how we risk stratify AML based on the very complicated genomic architecture. This is an oligoclonal disease. It's not a single clone like CML that's driven by that one translocation. These are very genomically complex. And so I started out interested in an AML precursor condition called clonal hematopoiesis, and looking to see if exposures heighten the risk of clonal hematopoiesis. And a part of that has to do with latency, because kind of like in a clinical trial, if you want to see an overall survival benefit for a disease like myeloma, where patients are living 10, 15 plus years, you're going to have to wait for a long, long, long time. It's the same with exposures because of latency. If you want to see, does an exposure contribute to a cancer? Maybe not per se cause, but contribute. You may have to wait decades before you see that signal, and there can be competing causes for death. Service members can leave the military. Veterans can leave the Veterans Health Administration system and go get civilian health care. So it's impossible to capture this. So I think focusing on cancer precursor conditions that you can see earlier than having to wait is important. And so I did work with the VA, the Durham VA in North Carolina, to acquire genomic DNA from Gulf War veterans who reported oil well fire smoke exposure during the 1990 to 1991 Gulf War. And we looked for clonal hematopoiesis in that cohort of patients. And it was a small pilot study. So we had 60 veterans total, 30 reported exposure, 30 did not. The thing about small studies, and I'll say epidemiology is hard. I walked into it thinking clinical care is hard. This is going to be easier compared to the high stakes decisions we make with our patients every day in the clinic. But epidemiology is hard because on one end, especially when using biospecimens, these are precious samples and you don't want to waste them. On the other end, if you do a small study, a pilot study, you're only going to be able to detect big differences. Like statistically, you need large numbers to detect small differences. But if you only have small sample, you can only detect a big difference. And so it's very challenging to do this type of research. But I started out my career interested in myeloid neoplasms. And then sort of, as I moved from civilian fellowship back to the military, and I cared more for younger active duty service members, my interest sort of transitioned from myeloid neoplasms more to lymphoma, because it's more common in active duty service members. It's the most common hematologic malignancy diagnosed in active duty, just because they're younger. These are adolescents and young adults, largely under the age of 40 are active duty. And so I've done a few projects looking at multiple myeloma in our young patient population. This stemmed from just simply seeing active duty who were under the age of 40 being diagnosed with full-blown multiple myeloma, and wondering, do I transplant them? They're so young. Like, are they going to benefit from MEL 200? So are they at higher risk of secondary leukemia if you do transplant them because they're so young? So I did do a little project with answering that question, and that project utilized ASCO's CancerLink data set. And so that was an interesting project. It was fun. There was a lot of networking. I learned a lot. It was a fun project, and I got to work with a bioinformatics specialist. It was a lot of fun doing that project. Then I sort of moved more toward from myeloid to myeloma to lymphoma. I've looked at the cancer registry to see if there's differences in survival between our active duty and the general population from the SEER database. And then now I'm more focused on moving away from retrospective studies, because retrospective studies have flaws. And my research interest now is focused more on research that involves direct interaction with patients. So that's sort of a little bit about my research interest over the past decade.
I think this is a very hot topic, and I also think it speaks to, going out there, what databases are there where I can get that data? Like I said, if it is starting off with retrospective data and making those connections, applying for grant funding. And then the other thing you said really struck a nerve with me is, what type of patients do I see? Because I try to advise that to trainees. What are you seeing every day? Because that's a population that's going to be easiest for you to study versus something that maybe is less common in whatever uh, setting you're in. How have you found in terms of getting, you touched on this, research support or getting trainees involved, career development awards? What are the different mechanisms you're using to spur on these projects?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's just years of networking. At my last duty station in California, there's a clinical investigation facility, and I still very much regularly stay in touch with the research folks at that facility. There's a geneticist, a bioinformatics specialist, a data scientist, statisticians, IRB regulatory people who, and it's a small group. So I'm still involved with them with some projects. Also, Brooke Army Medical Center is a huge medical center, and I'm very much close with one of the research leads, Dr. Mike Morris. He's an intensivist, and he leads the research team there at that medical facility. And so him and I have a few projects going on together. The Uniformed Services University has a plethora of researchers who have their own labs, and the research going on at the university is top notch, and it's impressive. There are ways, and there are people, and there are connections to do any sort of research project. I think what I would tell my trainees is, if you have an idea, don't give up. You can find people. There are ways to get your project across the IRB. You can do it properly. You may not have everything you want right there at your fingertips, but it's out there. And there's plenty of people interested in this topic. This topic of exposures, cancer in our military patients is hot. Like you said, there are ways to find the right partners to get research done. And a lot of it involves getting out there and networking.
You mentioned it being a hot topic, and as a layperson, a non-clinician, I can tell you the awareness is growing in the community around all of these folks coming back from the various service that they served in, the positions. Like you said, younger. These cancers and hematological disorders are hitting very young people, and so the public is becoming a little more aware of how many hundreds of thousands of veterans or even active duty that are soon to become veterans are coming back into our world. And I'm concerned about making sure that there is funding available for that. And so that's, it's more of that's a bigger picture issue away from the clinical side, but from an advocacy perspective, making sure that we are putting pressure on the people who matter in positions of giving funding to those studies and to following which disorders and which cancers are affecting them as they're coming back, because it's new. It's relatively new in the field. So just concurring that it's not only a hot topic for you, but a hot topic, I think, in the general public.
And that's where I feel I've been very impressed by the VA. The VA just supports their clinicians and their scientists so well, like the career development awards and the pre-career development awards. That is such a fantastic support that VA physicians get from the VA. I think it's amazing.
I was wondering a little bit, we are starting a mentoring initiative for AVAHO, and it always makes me wonder when we talk to our guests, were there mentors along your way that inspired you or had an influence on your own career path? And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about mentors who were impactful for you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. I think the new generation of trainees might have an impression of what a perfect mentor is. And it might be, at least for me, my impression was, oh, I need a mentor who is going to almost be like my professional mom or dad, like guide me, feed me, teach me. And when I finished fellowship, the reality set in that just, at least in my environment, doesn't really exist. So you take what you get. And if you take what you get, you'll find that it's plenty. It's enough. So for me, I haven't had one mentor heavily involved in me, guiding me on every step of the way. I haven't, but I have had small mini mentors who have greatly influenced me in my career just through small interactions. And so for me, for the trainees, like, you have to be willing to accept that. And you have to be receptive to that type of mentorship, to piecemeal, high quality mentorship. So a couple of people, going early, residency, my residency program director, he was a colonel in the Air Force, Michael Forgione. He very much had a big impact on me indirectly because he was authentic. He was an Italian guy from Philadelphia, and he cursed and dropped the F-bomb, and it was completely, to a lot of people, they would be like, whoa, what is this? But he's being his authentic self. And so in leadership, I think it's important to be authentic to who you are. And I learned that from him. My next program director in fellowship, she was so forgiving and gave me so much grace that, for me, for the past 3.5 years being a fellowship program director, she really influenced me a lot. And I model her a lot in this role as a fellowship program director. Sometimes people are having a bad day. Give people grace, assume good intentions. Sometimes you have to swallow your pride a little bit in certain leadership roles. But when you see your leaders doing that and modeling that gracefully, it touches you and it influences you. My research mentors, I've had Wendy Bernstein, an Army colonel, retired researcher, mostly focuses on HIV, but she's a hematologist. She did the clonal hematopoiesis project with me. I also have another research mentor. Her name is also Wendy Cozen. She's a lymphoma epidemiologist at University of California, Irvine. And so my research mentors, again, this isn't intensive mentorship. It's just little snippets of mentorship. And they've been really wonderful in being brutally honest with me. Sometimes you need friction. You need friction to keep your knife sharp. And sometimes you need someone to tell you, that's a dumb idea, or that's unscientific, or why don't we do it this way instead? And sometimes you need that brutally honest feedback to be your best self and to more importantly, do the best, most scientific research for our military patients. So in that regard, my research mentors have really influenced me a lot in maintaining a high bar for research standards. Lastly, Mark Rashevsky, another Army veteran, lymphoma specialist. He was at the National Cancer Institute. He just moved to Memorial Sloan Kettering. He was a phenomenal mentor. Phenomenal mentor, almost in a paternal, like, dad way. He sort of keeps you focused on what's important in life. What's important in life is doing good research, doing good science, and good patient care, not getting an abstract accepted to a meeting necessarily. I mean, that is very important for your career, but what I learned from him, what I gleaned from him, is that there's a bigger picture to focus on. And if you focus on that, the abstracts and the papers will come with it. Does that make sense?
It does. This is music to my ears. This is my wheelhouse in the leadership development space. And thank you so much for your answer, because I can't tell you how often I hear someone say, I don't know the leader I'm supposed to be. I don't know what kind of leader I'm supposed to be. The number of people I've coached in my career who have asked me that question, or said, tell me how to be the right kind of leader. They're looking for this model that exists. And while I can teach them strategies and I can teach them some of the more virtuous behaviors of leadership, you have to be authentic. And it sounds like what you had was a string of authentic leaders who, because of their authenticity, taught you a unique perspective from each angle. Meaning not one of those people was going to be able to teach you all of those things. It had to be a combination of their skills and their gifts. And that's what's so important to remember when you're walking into a mentorship or a leadership situation.
Absolutely. And we tell our fellows this too. You have 10 different core faculty here in the fellowship program. Not all of them are perfect, but they all have unique, very good traits. Take the good of each of them and model it and adopt it when you're developing your professional identity. Take the best part of all of the people you've crossed paths with along the way and mold that together and use that to your advantage.
Exactly. And you'll find the things that resonate with you. You mentioned the mentor who was good at forgiveness, and it sounds like that one was really important to you. Probably either because you needed it at the time, as we all do, or it's a skill that you already inherently have. And so what it did was sort of put a spotlight on something in you that said, I can align with that. I can also mirror that behavior, and I can be that person for someone else. And so, yeah, it's about finding that thing in each person, again, that's their gift. And then to your point, taking it and deciding, is that a gift I want to pass along to someone else? Do I have the capacity to be that person? The person who was very blunt, that is not my capacity. I'm less that person. And so while I would appreciate it so much and do appreciate it when someone's that way with me, that's not the gift I'm passing to someone else. I'm probably saying, go down the hall and talk to so-and-so. They're going to tell you what's going on straight. So
absolutely. And I even remember there was one scenario when I was a fellow. And Nick, you probably remember these days in fellowship, you're exhausted. Back in the day when we had a pager, you're getting paged all night when you're on, and you're sleep deprived and you're stressed and you feel like you're drinking out of a fire hydrant. And I remember it was the middle of the night and I got a phone call from an intern. And it was a question at that time that just seemed completely inappropriate. And I had a moment where I snapped at the intern, and I felt so bad about it afterwards. And the next day, my program director called me, and I was like, oh my God, I'm in trouble. She's going to yell at me. She's going to counsel me. I'm in trouble. But instead, she asked me how I was doing. And are you doing okay? And what can I do for you? And that level of forgiveness, I try to model that for my fellows.
As we wrap up here, Dr. DeStefano, I was wondering, we want to have more young members and trainees involved with AVAHO and inspire this future generation. Is there any final words you would like to impart to young members as they're thinking about starting their career, particularly if they say, I do want to work within the VA, I want to do research that's relevant to military members?
I do. And here, I'm being my authentic self here. Hopefully this is received well. Wellness is very important, but it's also a luxury. And I think if you are clinically good and efficient, you will have extra time to do collaterals, to do research, to network without dipping into your wellness. Does that make sense? So that would be my final pearl of advice for this new generation of trainees. Value your wellness, but also make sure you're a really good clinician, up to date on research, the medical literature, and efficient, because that will allow you to better balance it all, to balance your clinical duties with leadership roles, with research, without compromising your wellness.
That's a fantastic way to end the show, with a message to our young members and trainees who are listening. And we really have appreciated having you on the show today. With that, we'll wrap up this episode of AVAHO Carecast, brought to you by AVAHO Voices.